I got a call from the Northwest manager over there saying, hey, we've got some video that you guys should come take a look at. And police talked to a few people, but I'm fine.
Okay.
I don't want to pursue it.
All right. I'll owe you.
I'm already good.
He's good, well,
I saw him right there.
you did.
Oh, where's the other?
First thing you did.
Is this-
Get out of jail free cards.
I'm sorry, what?
We have everybody?
This is everybody's
This is
here.
it? Ah.
Okay, it looks like we're a few minutes past time. I'm going to call the November meeting of the Great Falls International Airport Authority to order. As our usual monthly reminder, the mission of the Airport Authority is to optimize transportation services and development in our region. The vision of the GFIAA is to maximize the airport's benefit to our region. So welcome, everyone, in our first holiday week of the season. And remember that the board does appreciate participation from the public. If you have comments throughout the meeting or in the work session today, please stand, state your name and address, and your comments will be heard. So with a quorum of the board present, I will call the meeting to order. But let's do the roll call first. Commissioner Buck is absent. Commissioner Rooney.
Here.
Commissioner Hoban.
Present.
Commissioner Swenson.
Present.
Commissioner Talcott is absent, and Commissioner Evans present. Now let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, as usual, the first item on the business meeting today is the consent agenda. Consent agenda is made up of the routine day-to-day items that require board action but do not appear to have significant public impact. Items may be pulled from the consent agenda for discussion or vote by any board member. The consent agenda as presented today includes approval of board meeting minutes from October 25th, approval of Finance Committee meeting minutes from November 3rd, payroll checks totaling $78,958.06, maintenance and operations checks in sequence numbering 22695 through 22765 and totaling $2,135,715.65. And finally, the financial reports for October. Is there a request to pull any item from the consent agenda?
I noticed you missed item C in your, or E, excuse me.
E.
in
Oh,
your
sorry.
reading. And I don't know if that's
You know what?
significant or not.
I have these here for a reason. I probably should put them on. Pardon me. Yes, I did miss that item. Approved passage of facility charge totaling $60,000. Thank you, Sean. Now, is there anyone who would like to pull anything or discuss any item in the consent agenda?
I move we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Second. It's been moved and seconded that we accept the consent agenda as presented. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Consent agenda is approved. John, let's hear the director's reports.
All right, lots of exciting stuff this month. First of all, if you notice in your financial reports, our year-to-date electrical usage is about $10,000 below last year on a base of about $110,000. So we're beginning to see that LED savings, we think, from the projects that we did last year. And we just finished up a terminal project. It's been what, 2 months, Rod?
Yeah,
A couple months ago, we completed all the concourses and the spotlighting out in the terminals. So ideally, eventually, we'll have about $40,000 a year in savings from that program. And it looks like we're on our way to realizing some of that yet this year. So that's pretty exciting. The other thing I was going to report, we're working right now on the engineering RFP. Maria's working on drafting that. Ideally, the schedule right now, point this way since some of you guys might be interested in it. Ideally, right now, we'll have a draft RFP that we're going to circulate to the FAA. I guess this is a new step in the process that previously we had never done that before, but now the FAA wants to take a look at the RFPs. So we're going to circulate that hopefully down to the FAA in December, so they can take a look at it. And then right after the first of the year, we'd be advertising and looking for that new engineer, ideally having everything completed, maybe in the April timeframe, so that we can begin the 2017 design process for projects in the following fiscal year. The 2017, the majority of the program that year is an expansion of the SRE building, so it's mostly a vertical project, and it shouldn't be that complicated. It's just adding on some bays. So hopefully we'll have enough design time by the time we get done in April to get a contract negotiated, start the design work, and then be ready for a summer construction program that following year. So that's kind of the schedule we're on. It's pretty tight. The reason we're on a tight schedule, you may recall, is the new FAA requirement we learned about last year, which is that our master plan has to be published and out to the public before we can do an engineering solicitation. If we have a master plan underway, of course we have a master plan that has not yet been approved by the FAA. Ideally, they're telling us that'll be done yet this year. The master plan will get approved hopefully in December. We'll be out on the street as early as January and hopefully get everything wrapped up in April. That is the schedule, we hope. Unfortunately, there's a couple of FAA steps in there that we have to get through before we can do that.
Quick question, John.
Yeah.
Does your current CIP show what's on the master plan now?
It does.
It's
Yep.
updated?
Yep, it is, and we can certainly email that to you guys if you're interested. If you
I would
want
like
to
that.
leave us a couple email addresses, we'll just email you the CIP. We just updated it here in the last couple of months, and so and after 17, my memory's kind of foggy on what we're doing. But yeah, we can certainly, and it's been actually in recent agendas. I think we had on the agenda a month or two ago, the board packet, but we'll get you the most recent one. And then the second item we'll talk about a little bit is construction. The contractor took advantage of good temperatures and they actually completed paving the morning before the snow, which was right up to the limit, but we got it done. So we're paved out now. The project is completed. They even got the service road paved that goes around the end of the runway. We had to relocate that because it was in the safety area. So we're done with paving. Are they getting any paint down, Rod?
Yeah, they got the center line and edge lines, and we're today working on thresholds.
Okay, so paint, we need 40 degrees and rising to put down paint, so these warm temperatures are ideal. It's temporary, so it's basically just a light coating, but the reason you do that is when we come back in the spring, they won't have to relocate all the lines. They'll be able to see where the lines go, and then they can put on the final coat of paint. You want to let that oil boil out some before you put down the final paint, because if you put it right on fresh asphalt, it'll fade out in almost no time, because it can't penetrate any of that aggregate or anything with that fresh oil on top. So when they come back in the spring, we'll have some warm days by then, melt off some of that top oil, and then we can get the final paint down. So in any event, you have to do two paintings to get the paint down. So we'll operate off of the first round of paint all the way until spring. They'll come in, they'll get the final paint down, and then we'll be done with that piece of it. They also need to do their grooving. Have you heard any update on
I
that?
haven't heard an update yet.
There's only the FAA, again, came up with a new grooving standard. The grooving, they basically cut horizontal lines in succession down the end of that runway to improve the drainage and maximize friction. It used to be you just cut grooves. Now you have to cut hexagonal? Is that hexagonal groove in order to maximize the drainage capability of the groove. Unfortunately, there's only a few companies that have the grinder that does that. So the options are somewhat limited. The guy that was supposed to be on our project is pretty booked up in December. So our engineer's been working with the contractor to try and get someone out there to get the grooving done, because it'd be a horrible shame after all this work we've gotten done if we can't open the runway because it's not grooved. You have to wait about 3 weeks between the paving and the grooving to ensure that the asphalt's fully bonded. That'll be up here in the second week of December. So anytime after the second week in December, we can begin grooving. Hopefully they'll be able to get somebody lined up to do that so we can get that runway open yet this year. There's quite a bit of electrical work that's got to be completed, all the edge lights, the signs, all those things. We're getting our new lighting computer on the 5th of December. That's a critical step. You may remember our other one conked out on us back in September. So we've been literally manually turning the lights on whenever they've got to change the intensity. We've got to send someone to change the intensity in the lighting bulb. Luckily, we have that overnight fella now. who's been able to do a lot of that. But we want to get that lighting computer fixed so that the tower can control the lights themselves. That'll begin on the 5th. It's a 2-day intensive process where the actual manufacturer has to be on site to do the installation, make sure all the lights work, all the controls have to be set to make that system work. Pretty extensive piece of work, and that's going to happen on the 5th. And then the lighting will actually continue all the way into January. There's enough lighting work, they're going to be working well into the first of the year. So ideally, we'll have the runway maybe open maybe as early as February, if everything goes well. Yeah, everything goes well, which is good. The heavy wind loads, usually February, March, April, that's when you see those strong westerly winds. So that'd be good timing if we get everything done by then. Let's see, what else on the construction side? I think that's pretty much it. Anything else I missed, Ron?
Demobilizing now, so.
Yeah, a lot of the equipment's actually leaving the site.
Equipment.
Really have to say the contractor did about everything we could have asked for. I mean, they did a great job out there getting this project in. All the seating's done now.
Seeding done, there's gonna be a little bit of topsoiling left after electrical, but basically all the dirt work, topsoiling, seeding, all that's done.
Yep, the surface looks really good. I think they did a nice job on it, so we're pretty excited about that. And then we're, as the weekly report has said the last couple of weeks, we're in discussions with FAA. They're kind of rethinking some of the intersection design. This is what we call Alpha 4. This is what, I'm sorry, yep, Alpha 4. And then down here, we've got a second intersection, which is Alpha
6,
What?
5 and 6.
Boy, this is old, Rod. But,
That's 6 there,
And then 4?
5.
5.
There is no 4 until we build it.
And then we're going to rename it 4. Yeah.
No, we're gonna put in a new
Okay,
4.
that's true. Okay, so the original proposal was to build a new Alpha 4 here, which will come over and cross into the runway. The FAA doesn't like crossings in the middle third of the runway because they've deemed that the high energy section of the runway. This is kind of yet another new discussion point. We've pointed out to them that landing airplanes actually have a lot of energy at the runway ends. So and most runways typically operate in both directions. This is our dominant direction, then you have quite a bit of traffic on the other end too. So in our opinion, there's no such thing as a low energy part of the runway. And we've even pointed out to them that most of the incidents, most of the recent serious incidents that have occurred over the last 20 years or more have involved landing airplanes, not airplanes taking off. So we really think that the new direction to avoid intersections in the middle doesn't make a ton of sense. And you can imagine, like at a Dallas-Fort Worth has 3-4 dozen crossings in the middle of the runway, how much additional dwell time, how much complication, how much delay would be caused by forcing every airplane to go to runway ends to do their crossings. Just a tremendous burden. So they would like to create a new taxiway over here on what we would call Bravo 6, would be over here, and then build a piece of the taxi lane over here. It's a very expensive proposal. In addition to that, all of the traffic that would be sitting at this intersection is in what we call the runway protection zone of this runway and also the new dirt strip. So you're actually setting in a fairly unsafe place to do these crossings. Not only that, but every single airplane trying to operate on runway 16, because you end up over here, is going to have to cross the runway, cross another runway. They have to cross once. Now they're going to have to cross this runway to get over here to come up to the runway end, or on landing, they have to do it to get back. So it forces an additional runway crossing for every single aircraft that operates. The way we resolve this is we've asked our tower, our ATC, to call a runway safety meeting, which brings in all of the folks from Seattle, the great minds that descend on us to give us direction and guidance on how to design a safe airfield. So they'll be coming on site. We'll be talking to them about some of the challenges we see. You can see this runway used to cross here. There's a significant grade issue in this area. The runway was raised dramatically to reduce a line of sight issue. There used to be a dip here when the runway was reconstructed in 2008. If we create a new crossing in this area, it's possible that small planes won't be able to see over top of the runway to see a plane on the other side. So that you could have two small planes on either side of that runway that can't see each other across the runway in that location. In addition, this is so low down in here because airplanes can only do a 1.5% grade. They can't go any steeper than that. So to connect this point, it's going to be a very critical grade intersection. You won't be able to see the runway end if you're sitting over here on B6. Here, at the A4 connecting, which is what we're proposing, you can see both runway ends to see if someone's on the runway lined up before you try to cross that runway. And the reason that's important is just the other day, we had a worker down here working on the runway, cleared by the tower, and an airplane was cleared to take off with him on the runway. Alertly heard the radio and cleared the runway. But that visual and that visual awareness and that radio awareness is super important to ensuring safety out there. And so when you can't see these intersections and you don't have any visual way to confirm that you've got a safe environment, you're relying solely on that controller to have awareness of the situation. And that controller with this B6 alignment is going to have to think very carefully about where he stops traffic. Because if this runway is in operation, which today in our current environment, the C-130s use this runway throughout the day while runway 3 is in operation, you've got to ensure that you're holding traffic way back in this area here so you don't clear someone into here when the C-130 is taken off. It's a fairly complex environment to do if you're using this B6 intersection. So as the runway safety team comes into Great Falls, we hope to really sit down with them, discuss these very serious concerns, and get them back over to a B4 alignment. The timeline's critical because right now we should be designing B4 for construction in April. We have to bid this project April 15th, isn't it? Yeah. April 15th we have to be out for bids. There's not a lot of time. We have a fairly good level of design already done. I think we're probably about 15-20% design done on B4 because when we did the new taxiway C last year, we had to lay out those intersections to make sure we could plug into them right. So a lot of the preliminary design is done, but we need to advance that to buildable design. So the timeline is pretty constricted. We're trying to get the FAA to get a meeting together as quickly as possible so we can resolve this issue and then get to design and construction. And that'll be our 17 project that we'll be doing next summer. So the timeline is tight. Normally this time of year we'll be coming to you with approval for design contracts so that we can begin design on next year's project. But unfortunately we're bollocksed up in this decision-making matrix with the FAA, so we don't have a scope of work that we can bring to you to get that approved. So we'll be very late in the season. In January, probably bringing to you, maybe even a December meeting if we get the decision made by the Christmas party. We might actually ask for a short business meeting to get that design scope approved if the FAA moves that quickly. Alternatively, we'll be well behind the 8 ball by the time we get to January if we can't get the decision made by then.
So John, what's the odds that they will listen?
I think we've got a compelling case. We've talked to FAA certification and to the tower, and they all agree with us. There's one team called the runway safety team that came up with this idea, and I'm not sure it was thought all the way through. So I think if they're given some time to really think about needing an additional runway crossing for every single operation using that runway, in addition to that, the visibility concerns, and then the complication. I mean, a controller is really going to have to be very aware of what's going on if you've got the traffic over here holding, because they've got to keep it clear of this area while this runway is in operation. And even if you clear somebody over onto this runway, there's a limited number of places that they can sit and be out of all the surfaces that they need to be out of for this runway and this runway to operate. So they've got to get across the runway, get positioned in a small box, and sit there in a very particular place, otherwise we're violating safety surfaces on either one of these two runways. It ends up being kind of a funny little triangular hold bar that you've got. And of course, you've got to hold them there because you don't want them blasting across the runway without clearance too. So they've got to complete 2 runway crossings. That's a lot of radio traffic to do one thing. This we think is a much better solution. But as I said, it seems like every year there's a new thought out there about what's safer and better, and it doesn't always really make sense when you go back and look at the broader picture. So that's what I've got on the construction side. Next item I have is we have an update for you on the fuel truck insurance provisions we talked about a few months ago. The board approved us putting out a new agreement for fueling trucks, and I'll let Laura kind of update you on what she's been doing to get that figured out.
Yeah, it was the September 27th board meeting, and you approved moving forward with this permit. We were just going to do some research on the actual amount, and so I'm passing around a copy here that shows what the changes were to that paragraph. And I talked with other airports, the FBOs, insurance agents, the fuelers, truckers, quite a few people, talked with Mick. And really, I feel like the $5 million limit is where we should be. We had to also call out that we had a specific endorsement for the pollution. And then again, on the flip side, that they don't have anything that excludes the pollution. There's one of the companies that currently delivers does have 10 million, so they can always go above and beyond, but 5 million is kind of the standard out there that we felt would cover us and be fair to everybody. So this is what we've moved forward. It doesn't need to come back to the board. Like I said, you already approved it, but I just wanted to show you what changes we made to it before we put it into place for the fuelers. Questions?
And I think the state also requires 5 million, is that correct?
Yeah, by law, the 5 million is required.
So there is some consistency around that $5 million number.
So for them to be compliant with the law,
They should already have the 5 million.
so this is really kind of redundant? Or is this just verifying they're following the law?
Yeah, we put that in there, but then obviously we have the other pieces in there.
Well-
Probably are, as far as making sure that they're following,
We want to be additionally insured, which today we don't have.
right.
So that we can draw on that insurance if there is an incident. And the other thing, we want to be able to kick specific drivers off the premises if they're not complying with the safety features of the system. So that's what we gain by having this permit.
And it does sound like most companies, if they're larger, are going to have 10 or more anyhow. So we say the 5, but you're going to have more coverage there.
Looks good.
And certainly put it on a future agenda if the board wants to make a different change to it. Otherwise, we would just go ahead with it.
No, I think we were, if I recall correctly, we were indicating go forward after research on the limits, yeah. Yep. Okay, thanks.
Then we have, the FAA has asked us for an update to the leases that they have on our premises. They lease a number of facilities here for instruments. We've got a radar and several other arrays. We've got the air traffic control tower. And they've contacted us and asked for some changes. We think they're administrative, and we can do them within the office, but we do want to inform you of them. And if you prefer, we can put it on a future agenda. But I'll let Laura kind of brief you on what those changes are.
Well, John just summed it up. We have one agreement for the land, just the land. So we have the land underneath the air traffic control tower, the land that navigational, weather, communication aids are on, and we're required to give those free of charge to the FAA, and then they take care of all the instruments and equipment or the tower that's sitting on top of that land. So all of those have been in one agreement. And probably over a year ago, they told us that it was very important that these were in separate agreements. So they've spent quite a bit of time getting these into 3 separate agreements. Looking at the 3 separate agreements, it just puts the air traffic control tower on one and then the rest of them on another. And then you have operationally how the air traffic control tower will be handled. All of that was in one. They've just divided it into 3. All the terms are the same. It technically doesn't need to come to the board. If you guys want to see it, we can bring them to you. I do have copies of them today. I've also sent it over to Mick, and he has looked over them, and he doesn't have any heartburn with it either. He says go ahead and move forward. There's a couple of typos and things in here that we're still working through on the draft, but it doesn't change anything going forward. It just divides them into separate agreements.
I've proposed we raise the rent by 5 times.
Yeah, we can try that.
5 times 0.
Sean, you look like you're...
Oh, I'm just curious, what, just arbitrary bureaucrat deciding to waste your time?
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
They have not given us any reason why. these need to be separated, but they've spent a lot of time getting all of these agreements separated, so.
They're reorganizing within on their end.
We should send them a bill for the administration cost of this. I mean, I think if their edicts came with a price tag, maybe there'd be less of them.
You would think, but I've seen them pay plenty of money for their edicts. I don't know.
Does anyone feel the need to have this put on the agenda for a later meeting?
I don't.
I think we're good.
Oh, come on. It's exciting stuff.
Then the last thing I have is just a reminder of the holiday party. We're at
13th,
13th.
5 o'clock to
5
6
o'clock.
o'clock is cocktails, and we're talking about maybe it's something fun during that time frame.
Yeah, we're thinking about just doing a little white elephant giveaway at the beginning, just to create a little activity around the party, and board members are welcome to attend. Probably a maximum gift of $15 or something, and you throw it in there and see where you end up. That's kind of what we're thinking.
Yeah.
So,
And then 6 o'clock dinner will start, and of course all the same kids stuff on the other side, so.
and
Same as
there's a
last year.
there's a slight chance if somehow we would break free that scope of work, that we would want to have a quick business meeting maybe at 4:30. But it would be relatively quick just to get the scope of work on an agenda so we could approve it in January. But if the FAA hasn't decided anything, we won't be able to do that anyway. So it's a slim hope, but hope nonetheless. And so there's a chance we might ask for a quick meeting.
Okay.
And that's all I have on the director's report.
Okay, any questions or comments for John?
What about our land with the city and the,
Oh, I've got that on the agenda.
oh, that's on the
Yeah.
agenda? I should read the agenda, shouldn't I?
It's in the work session today.
Oh, just can't wait.
You just can't wait. Okay, so we have next, action requested on the FedEx building air conditioning.
Yes, you may recall we lost the compressor for the second time in a couple of years on the FedEx building earlier this spring, right during the first hot snap. And we had to do some emergency repair work. We put a new compressor on there. We reviewed the design documents. We actually hired a different company to come in and from what initially installed it and kind of look at the design and see what else needed to be done. And one of the recommendations that kind of our guys and their guys came to was we should probably do some work to review all the control systems and make sure they're operating optimally. So the system's made up of hardware, and then the controls that manage that hardware. We think there's more that could be done to even the load over those two compressors that are in that system. And so we would like the board's permission to go out and do some control work on the FedEx system. I believe it's about $6,500. I'm having a hard time finding my
That's it.
for some reason.
$6,500.
About $6,500 to redo those controls and optimize that system. So we'd ask for permission to spend that.
And so, John, this would be an airport expense, right?
Yes,
Like the repair was?
it is. Yeah,
Yes.
this would come out of this would be a capital improvement for $6,500.
Okay. So, we're looking for action on the request authorization, staff recommendation, requesting authorization to spend up to $6,500 in capital expenditure dollars to complete a controls optimization on the FedEx system.
Move that we approve as requested. A second motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to accept the motion as presented. Are there questions, comments? Sean?
So we replaced the air compressor, in the 3 years we replaced that same one, while the original one seems to be working as maintained, right?
Right, so there's two up there. There's a bigger one and a smaller one, and the bigger one's gone out twice in short order. And so one of the things that we did with the last repairs, we put in some pressure release valves because it seems like that compressor is getting swamped by having too much pressure in the system. So we actually have added some relief valves.
Yeah, redid some piping and some different controls.
Did we do any investigation just to make sure it wasn't a manufacturing flaw in the compressor itself? I'm
The
just
second
curious.
compressor, yeah, they've looked at the system and their feeling is that it's getting swamped by the pressure. So they added those relief valves. Interestingly, the relief valves were in the original design, but they weren't installed for whatever reason. When they got in there and started looking at the system, they said, well, it did call for relief valves, but for some reason they weren't put in when it was installed back in 2008, wasn't it? Or no, it was before that.
2,000 about.
It did 2000, but for whatever reason they weren't put in. So they added the relief valves, which I think will keep the system from swamping. But now that there's this additional plumbing and everything else in there, you kind of have to do the controls again to make sure everything balances correctly.
Kind of isolates the two compressors more so that they operate more independently and not so much together.
And then ideally, the other option would have been to replace the entire system, which I think they were telling us was about $40,000
$40,000 just for,
to do the whole system. Then you would have had
Part of
everything
it.
new. But we, in the end, we elected not to do that. Ideally, when we get this appraisal done, which should be done in December, we'll begin discussions with FedEx about transitioning that building at some point someday, if the board's willing, through a sale. And then, things like this, eventually our goal would be to, they would own the building and they would be responsible for the maintenance on the building.
Other questions or comments? It has been moved and seconded at this point to accept the recommended staff authorization. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The motion passes as submitted. The second item of business today is the action on the Holman Aviation lease extension.
Yes, the staff is recommending a lease extension to Holman Aviation's whole lease. This last year, summer, they completed some repairs to the aircraft ramp area. They installed some concrete pads underneath the wheel loading on a lot of their parking positions. And then they've overlaid the remaining area with asphalt and created a really nice new pavement surface. There's actually a picture of it, I think, in here. So you can kind of get a look at what that looks like. A really nice improvement. And they invested about $212,000. The area impacted was about 12,500 feet. The life of that should be at least 15 years and should extend the maintenance cycle on that quite nicely. We've seen pavement perform really well in that area. So we're recommending a lease extension onto the Holman lease of 6 years, which would bring us to an expiration date in May of 2047. They also have some additional improvements they want to make in the future. This brings us to kind of a total of 10 years for a combined lease of $388,000 over the last few years, last 5 years or so. So we've extended that lease for about 10 years. We think with the additional plans that they have, that would kind of set a benchmark of a 15-year extension for about $500,000 worth of investment, which I think is in line with what I've seen in other airports in terms of reinvestment in facilities, and sets a nice precedent for the future when we have tenants reinvesting in their facilities.
Okay. So their recommendation is to extend Holman Aviation's lease for 6 years to May 31st, 2047, based on their investment to cap the aircraft ramp near the U.S. Customs hangar and a similar repair on the public ramp. This recommendation provides Holman Aviation with a total lease extension of 10 years for the combined investments of $388,000 over the past 5 years. Is there a motion?
I move that we accept the recommended action as it's written.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, the recommended action has been moved and seconded as presented. Questions or discussion? Sean?
Holman asked for apparently a 16-year extension?
I think that's
in
right.
their
In the letter.
In their letter?
Mhm.
Was there any negotiation that took place? Is this a
Dwight and I
an
talked,
equitable agreement, or is?
I think so. Dwight and I talked shortly after I got the letter, and I just said, I'd like to put this on the agenda. Actually, we put it on the agenda the next day because the letters, you can see, came in right before the October deadline. And I just kind of said, I think, we need to kind of set a baseline, and I think, 15 years for $500,000 is a good baseline for us going forward with other tenants that we could maintain, that type of a policy, not so much a policy, but a precedent. And so we kind of talked back and forth and said, we kind of gave you the years last year. We want to give you some years in a couple years when you do this next repair, and that would get you right to kind of what you're asking for, which is, to get you to a full 40-year term, at the end of this next round of repairs. And so I think, we kind of talked it back and forth and thought this was a fairly equitable proposal to bring to the board.
So you're happy to wait?
I understand. I understand.
Okay.
The trigger for the 40 was based on prior actions by the airport authority where they were offering 40-year leases for other business on the airport. And so that was primarily my basis for asking to extend our lease up to a full 40 years.
Okay. Well, what terms, just out of curiosity, what terms are actually fixed in that contract besides the years? Is there's flexibility in terminating if Dwight said he's going to?
I haven't looked at the actual termination in that one. Do you know what typically the
flexibility in pricing?
we can always condemn something if we have to take it. Then of course there's a fair market value, approval. I don't know what your termination rates are, Dwight. Have you ever looked at that?
I can't speak to it right off the top of my head. The other thing that's variable in the agreement is the rate that we're paying for the lease of the land.
And that's at the
airport
board's
authority
discretion.
can adjust that at their decision, following some parameters throughout the life of the agreement.
So, with the other tenants, right, when their lease comes close to the end, if they want to renew it, or are we going to demand $500,000 worth of leaseholder improvements to get 15 years? Is that the precedent we're setting?
Kind of, yeah. The FAA precedent is, the FAA rules are, we're supposed to expedite leases to their end and then take those facilities over and charge building rent for them. The practicality of that is, we don't want to own, 5 or 6 buildings inside the Holman facility that we've got to then maintain as they were our own. We have enough problem with FedEx, right? In my opinion, and the other thing we don't want to do too is, in Mike's case also, the ramp was built, at some point in the past to be a public ramp. Then we leased it out to an exclusive tenant, and we're not allowed to use our monies, our federal monies, to come back in and do maintenance inside an exclusive leased area. So a tool like this, where we can encourage investment and reinvestment in those ramps and those facilities over time in exchange for leases that continue into perpetuity, keeps us from having to find ways to fund these infrastructure improvements that we can't use our federal dollars for. Now, you don't want to dole these out, to where, because the FAA also caps the lease terms that you're allowed to offer. We you don't want to dole out, huge lease extensions for small investments, because at some point that tool, you won't be able to use it anymore, because you're out of extensions and infrastructure needs to be rehabilitated. Who's going to pay for it? So we have to be somewhat judicious, because, while Dwight has reinvested in some of his areas, remember he has a very large leasehold. And so he's improving some areas bit by bit by bit, and we're adding lease term to his entire area bit by bit by bit. So you want to, the other thing you could do is break up that area into a bunch of different leases and then give lease extensions as they're improved. But that's not the model we have right now. What we have is one large leased area. He's making improvements, on a schedule, and we want to encourage that. The same would be true with Front Range. If they came in and said, we'd like to redo our ramp, we'd want to give them lease extension in order to continue that out. Alternatively, he could just say, well, at the end of my lease, I'm just done, and we would go out and RFP for a new FBO operator. That's what the FAA wants you to do. They want you to show that you're giving lease extensions in exchange for value, reinvestment, things like that.
And has that always been the?
That's been their revenue policy for, I'd say, at least 20 years. That policy is probably 20 years old. And so that's what we want. Obviously we want the Holmans to continue to operate Holman Aviation. We want Mike to continue to operate Mike's operation. We don't want them to get to the end and turn the keys over to us, and then we've got to go out and find someone else to operate it. That doesn't make a ton of sense, right? These are family businesses that have been built. They build equity into the business. We want to create tools for them to continue that.
So from Dwight's perspective, what's at risk here then?
In terms of extending the lease?
It seems like the only thing there is so we don't put out an RFP and find somebody else.
Right. I mean, he doesn't want the term to
But
expire.
you can't put somebody else in it.
Right.
You can always change the price.
The other element that should be mentioned here at this point is, if you stop and think about that from a basic business standpoint, it sounds ludicrous to own and pay for buildings on leased land, and at the end of the lease, you have to turn the title of the property over to the landlord.
The ownership.
Now, you tell me what bank would loan you any money under those terms. So the banks were more comfortable with a longer term lease that shows that they can get, because they're collateral with the buildings that are sitting on the land.
And that's a great point. So when he goes out and wants $500,000 to reinvest in his buildings, he can go to the bank and say, well, I have this long term to amortize your loan over. Whereas if we did it a different way, if he gets down to 10 years on his lease, it's going to be very hard for him to reinvest if we won't give him more years.
Makes it hard to do improvements, because if you're doing them little by little, you don't go borrow money little by little. So you put your money into it, and then you count on us making an extension on the lease. The bank's going to count on that when you actually do finance something big enough.
Yes.
But if they're happy with it, we're happy with it, I think.
Anyone else? I was going to invite you to speak. Dwight, did you get to convey?
I did. Thank you.
Okay. All right, it has been moved and seconded to extend the Holman Aviation lease for 6 additional years to May 31st, 2047. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
No, I thought it was 10.
Oh. Well, no, it's a total of 10 years. We did 4 years last year.
Okay.
Yeah, so when you look at it over 2 years, it's a 10-year extension over 2 years, in total $388,000 in improvements. This year is only 6 and $212,000 spent. But to give you the broader perspective, we have done 10 years over
Okay.
we will have done 10 years if we do this.
Okay, is everybody clear on that point? Okay, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign? Okay. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just roll right into work session or take a break?
Well, I'm going to ask for our comments. Anyone? Let's see, we'll start with the commissioners. Any comments?
None.
No?
I have no comment.
No? No? Okay. Public comments? No? Okay. What's the preference? Just roll right along here?
I'm always in favor of a short break.
Yeah, I knew looking at you, I knew what you were going to say.
Thank you.
That's all right. Everybody else good with that? Okay, I'm going to have to shut off.
I need to adjourn the meeting.
Oh, sorry. Okay, well then I adjourn the meeting. Don't be laughing. It's gonna be